Today we are going to start our studio project based on our principle of art that we talked about last week, which was rhythm and movement in art. And this is an example of a final piece. Yours would be similar to this, but this is my version of the assignment. We are going to focus on different watercolor techniques that you can use through your piece. We need to pay attention to the type of rhythms that we are using, and then our repeated patterns and motifs throughout our piece. Today what I would like to do is we're going to create a watercolor technique chart so that before you go to your final piece you will get some practice with how we're going to use our watercolors and all of these different techniques. So you're going to end up with a chart that looks something like this. So to begin with, I want you to take your paper that's on your desk. Make sure that you put your name on it somewhere so we can easily locate it when you put it in the drying rack. And you can label it Watercolor Techniques. And I would make this the back of my paper. Then I want you to fold it in half, and then fold it in half, in half, and in half again, so that you end up with a rectangle. And then when you open this up, you should have 16 fairly equal spaces to do your techniques in. Once you get it to this point, I want you to label them like this. There is a copy of this in your class notebook for semester 2, week 9, I believe, and you can use that to fill in your chart. When we're doing these techniques, this row here that has the masking tape, wax resist, rubber cement, and scratching, those are all techniques that you have to put down your items first. So if I do masking tape, I can use an X-Acto knife on a board and I can cut some very regular shapes, or I can just simply pull my masking tape in little bits and put that down on my paper. The nice thing about the masking tape is when I paint over this and then I let it dry, I can pull the masking tape off, and then I could put another color in there. I could put a pattern in there. There's a lot of options for me like that. But if I cut them with my X-Acto knife, I can make strips out of my tape, and I can make a really nice checkerboard pattern there if I want to do that. So you have to put that down first. Wax resist is simply a crayon, and you want to make sure that you really put your pattern down with the wax really heavily. I'm going to do one that's not quite so heavy, and I'll show you that it doesn't show up very well when you paint over it. The whole idea is to be able to paint over this. The wax will resist the water, and so I think this is a good time to use if you wanted to use a complementary color scheme, because that way you don't have to worry about the complements coming together and making a brown that you don't want. That would be a good way to use this technique. The next one is rubber cement. It has a brush in it like this. It's very gooey and it's very smelly. Do not put your paintbrush in here. It has a brush in it. So we could do this, and then you can simply just dab it on your paper. If you want not as big of spaces, you could dip a toothpick or something like that in there, but please do not put a paintbrush in there. It will ruin it. Okay? The next one is scratching. We're going to scratch into the surface of this paper, and I like to put my paper on top of either a notebook or a magazine or something that has some give to it, so your paper can really stretch a little. And you can use a wooden stylus like this. You could use the end of your paintbrush. I have this really heavy-duty fork here that I'm going to use, and I'm going to scratch into that paper. And I ripped it a little bit, so you have to be really careful. And then like this. When you use you're going to use a nice watercolor paper for your final painting, and it'll be a little bit more durable than this paper. So you want to go ahead and set all of these things in first, and then you're ready to start painting. You're going to use these watercolor trays that we've used before. Remember that you need to have a couple of cups of water available to you. I always have a couple of paper towels ready for me just to get my station ready. To get your watercolors ready, I like to just drop a few drops of water into each of my colors. I've already used these today, so they're already a little bit wet. Remember that your watercolor wants to move. When you're painting with watercolor, you do not want it to be too dry and not move. And you also do not want to dig in and take out a lot of that paint. That's not how you use these. If it is sticky or gummy, you have not used enough water. So you need to liquefy that binder a little bit more than that. Especially with the weather as humid as it is right now, it will absorb the water. And if you hang your painting up, if it's too dense, it will drip. It will absorb the water and drip down your paper. So make sure you activate your colors. Remember that you have your palette available to you over here. You do not have to be limited to the colors in this tray. It was great. Pull up a color, put it over here. Before I move to another color, I want to rinse that off. I always keep 2 cups of water, so I have nice clean water right here. And then I'm going to maybe pull a little of this purple and mix it with my blue. I have a beautiful blue violet. If I want to make that a little bit darker, I would go over here and pull up just a little bit of black and put that over here, and I can pull over here and I have a beautiful dark blue violet. So remember all that color theory that we did back in chapter 6. Bring that with you, please, to this assignment. It matters. Okay? So when you're done with this palette at the end of the day, remember that you will take it with your hands like this. You can bend it just a little bit and pull it apart. Wash this part out, dry it back off, and then put it back on your palette like this, and it is ready for the next person who wants to use this tray. We're going to be courteous and good art citizens. Okay, the first one you have is a solid wash. So you're just going to paint. A wash starts with literally you're washing it with water, and you're going to just paint it like this. I'm going to take some red here in my palette, and I'm going to just lay it in here like this and spread it around. And a wash is good for a background and a foreground, and go ahead and put your wash in first. Then you could use techniques like a dry brush on top of that, but you will need to make sure that this is nice and dry before you put another color on top, or it's going to bleed together. We'll do that in just a minute. You're going to do a gradient wash. Again, we're going to wet our paper down. If it's getting too close to that, just be careful. But I'm going to go quickly today, so I'm not being too careful. I have my wash. I painted with water first. I'm going to pull this dark, beautiful blue purple I have over here and put it over here. And it's darker. I want it a little bit darker on top. There we go. And then I'm going to rinse my brush again, and I'm going to pull over here at the bottom, and I want to be a lot lighter here at the bottom. And it's going to go from darker to light. That would be a gradient wash. Your glazing looks like this. Let's say I'm going to take this orange, and I'm going to put a strip here. I would probably want this to dry a little bit before I put another color on top, because I don't want it to bleed. But for demonstration purposes today, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to do the complement of my orange. I'm going to use this blue, and I would go this way, and wherever they meet, this color in here, that would be the glazing. And you can see where it's starting to feather out. That's because it was not thoroughly dry. My dry brush is just what it says. I'm still going to dip into my palette. It's wet, there's water in it, but I'm not going to wash. I'm just going to go right over the top. And I can even get drier if I want. And this is what you would use for your details. You can go over a wash. Once it's nice and dry, that's how you would use your dry brush over the top of a wash. Things like that. Okay? Now the parts that everybody wants to do. The masking tape. You're still going to do a wash. I'm going to go ahead and pull up this color I already have. I'm going to wash over the top. If you don't want it super thin, then you can put some water over here and then just paint it directly. You don't have to paint it with water first. It makes it a little bit more intense. That would be good. I like to use my wax resist in this with its complement. So I'm going to do, this is a yellow. I'm going to go ahead and pull my purple and add a little more water. Put it right over and see how that wax is coming to the top. Perfect. And you can see that the circles I made are really showing up. I can add a little more water to really make them show up. But that really light one that I did here doesn't show up hardly at all. So you need to make sure that that wax is really on there. You cannot take the wax off. It's going to stay the way it is. So with the masking tape, once it dries, I can peel that off and it's going to, yeah. And then if I want to, I could write and paint in there if I want to do that. Your rubber cement we put down, you want to make sure that that is good and dry before you paint. Please do not paint that when it is wet. And you will see that it is starting to come to the surface. And then when this is nice and dry, those little shapes I made, I can roll those off with my finger and that will be white underneath. The scratching, I like to put a pretty heavy coat on there, so I'm going to use this blue and I'm going to just lay it in there and hopefully this will show up. And it sinks into those lines that you made and is a little bit darker, so that gives you some texture in there. When we use our salt method, you want to put down a lot of water and pigment. Move it around. You can mix another color. I'm going to put a little bit of red in there. I can do that. It's going to make a pretty purple. Bring that color theory with you. Know what colors you can mix and what colors you don't want to mix. And then you're going to pinch a little bit of salt. I have it in a little container here. And you're going to sprinkle it on top of that really wet paint. And then when it dries, you will brush the salt off and it will look just like that when it dries, like the salt is actually still there. The next is rubbing alcohol. So go ahead and put your pigment down. I'm going to pull a little bit of blue, let them go together. And then I will have some bottles of this over there labeled, and you will just click and you will drop. It really works better on the better watercolor paper, but just drip. And you can get some really cool techniques that way. Your sponge, you can use a couple ways. I have this sponge and then I have a natural sponge, so either one. You can pick up from your palette over here. You might be able to pick up some pigment and you can sponge that way. That's nice. You can use this sponge, pick it up. You can go on top. Okay, and if you put a lot of water down like in here and it's too much, you can use your sponge to soak up some of that pigment that you don't want there. Your bubble wrap, let's just do here, lay quite a bit down, take your bubble wrap There's some over there on the table. Push it into your, and then you have that really cool texture there. And then the last little row, you're going to, we've already done some of this just by doing the demonstration. You're going to put wet, and then you're going to get a color that we know will work. I'm going to use blue, and I'm going to let them come here, and then I want them to meet here in the middle and mix. That will be your wet into wet. Your drop paint, it's going to be pretty wet, and you're just going to drop it. Kind of click your finger on your paintbrush. You can just drop it on here like that. If you don't want to get in places you don't want it to get to, you want to block it off with some scrap paper, something like that. Your splatter paint, I already have paint still on my brush. I'm just going to take my fingers and I'm going to go like this and spray it. Again, if I don't want it to get into places and get in here like this, I would block that off with some paper. And then last one, you're going to get a bunch of your paint. You're just going to drop it on there. Lots of water so that you can move it around with the straw over there. Once you get the straw, this is your straw. I don't want it back. You can keep it in your sketchbook or you can throw it away and we'll get you a new straw, but do not put it back in that container. And then you're going to blow it and move it around, and that's what it looks like. So this would be really nice if you did this and maybe put it on top of some of these washes that we did up here, so you can combine a lot of these techniques with other techniques. So have fun with it. You will get a grade for this, and then we will apply these to our drawing and then our painting for our final studio project dealing with rhythm and movement.